Okay, let's get started. Welcome to everyone. We have a great program today, The Future of Coral Reefs. I want to remind everyone that this session is recorded. We will distribute the link. Alice, why don't you put the link in the chat? That would be great, but it's oceanexchange.org/webcast/. But we'll share that widely on our website, on LinkedIn, on Twitter as well. I see people logged in from North America, UK, Europe, I believe South Asia. If you're in another place on this globe that I didn't mention, why don't you put in the chat box where you are, and we welcome you all. I also see many, many newcomers to Ocean Exchange who have registered, and we welcome you. In the last 2 days, you should have received an email from me welcoming you with information about today, but also a one-page summary about Ocean Exchange. And I'd like to connect separately with any of you. My coordinates are on that email address. So hit reply and let's talk. Ocean Exchange is a nonprofit, and we serve one purpose, and that's to help advance the adoption of innovative solutions for healthy oceans, healthy, sustainable coastal systems. We execute our mission in 2 ways. We give away free money, I like to say, and that is non-dilutive funds. And we help fill in the ecosystem an important gap after parties have different, often government, whether they're federal or local, state government grants, before they're ready for different kinds of investment. And we're part of that ecosystem. We also help our finalists and our semi-finalists with events like today, raising visibility about what we do and introducing them to you. You'll see here our sponsors. These are our major sponsors. You can look at oceanexchange.org and see all of our sponsors and all of our board members, and we could not do this without any of them. And so thank you all very, very much. Alice Spillman is here with us. She's our behind the scenes person. She sort of drives the bus while this is going on, and she's invaluable to us. And now I want to turn it over to Dane Dunstan. Dane is our MC at our physical event. Our next one will be in 2021, but he also has very graciously given his time to MC our webcasts. Dane, I'm going to leave it up to you now.
Hi, everybody. Great to see you. I'm very excited about today. We've got some really wonderful people here today, and I just want to share a story before we get started that'll put it into context a little bit. I was talking last week to an executive, a woman with a large bank, and she said, "I am so glad that everything's back to normal." And I thought, what? And she said, masks are normal, distancing is normal, and doing everything via virtually is normal. And she says, I'm good with it. And I thought, wow, that's a really, really good mindset to be in right now. Because if we're worrying about everything that's going on and how different it is and when's it going to go back to normal, we actually start to limit our ability to make good decisions as leaders and as people who are doing work. Because when you are able to be with what is, then you have the ability to start to be able to play. You can play in what is, you can be on this field, you can have fun with it. Even if it's not what we want it to be, it's what we have. And when we can play, we can be creative. And we're going to see some real creative play today in the idea of how we make our oceans healthier. And so to set that up, I want to do a little bit of a creative exercise around the idea of change blindness. If you know what change blindness is, it's our inability to see what is. We just simply keep reconstructing the world around us in the way we think it is. So I'll give you an example. I live outside of Austin, Texas. We get hot here in August, but it's just been a beautiful August, even though we've had a couple of heat waves. Last Saturday was fabulous. Temperature was really comfortable in the morning. I spent the morning out gardening, planting some flowers, doing some work around the house. It was great. You know, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I noticed it was up to about 99 degrees, and I thought that was an intelligent time for me to quit and go take a nap inside the cool air conditioning. I live a little bit outside of Austin, so I did not know until the next day when I saw the news that Saturday was the hottest day in history in Austin, Texas, 107 degrees. I missed it because I was involved in the world that I was in. So that's change blindness. Often we see the beauty around us and we see what's going on and our brains say all is well, but there's real damage being done. So I want to do an exercise. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to imagine a beautiful park near where you live, somewhere where you go maybe to exercise, to run, walk the dog, okay? You have a picture of the park, right? It's green, it's beautiful, and it's big. So where you're standing is a football field. I want you to envision a football field, and on the other side of the football field is a second football field, and then beyond that, there's beautiful lawns just continuing on through the trees. Okay, so here's what I want to do. We're gonna imagine that you're holding a timer, and you've got it in your hand. Can you see the screen of the timer? It's set for 1 minute, and now we're going to press the button. Boom, and the timer starts going, and nothing's changing. You can see everything looks beautiful. Then after about 15 seconds have gone by, you can look down, and around your feet, you can see a couple of places where the grass is starting to look brown. If you look away, though, it all still looks pretty green. Now we're getting down to 30 seconds, and you start to notice something that's really happening. Whole sections of the grass are turning brown, and the trees around the football fields, now you notice that some of the leaves are turning brown. They're starting to fall. 20 seconds left of the thing, brown everywhere. There's almost no green left, and you can see it spreading across to the second football field and beyond. 10 seconds left, nothing. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That is the rate that we are losing coral reefs in our planet. 2.5 football fields worth of coral reef every single minute. We don't see it because we live far away from them. It's underwater. We're not seeing it. We don't see it because we see beautiful pictures of beautiful oceans and it looks great, but most of the ocean is invisible to us. We need people to report on this. I learned this story from Sam Tetch of Coral Vita, who you're going to hear from next. He was our 2018 Ocean Exchange Neptune Award winner. But first, to set up what it's about, we need people who can tell us what's really happening underneath that water in the oceans around the world. And that's the job of Martin Caring of The Economist's World Ocean Initiative. So I want you to imagine a world with healthy oceans, and then how do we get there and how do we reverse this damage? So Martin, welcome to Ocean Exchange. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Dane and Millie and the whole Ocean Exchange team for inviting me to speak about coral reefs today and to be able to set the scene for Sam and Coral Vita. As Dane mentioned, it is really important to understand coral reefs. And at the Economist Group's World Ocean Initiative, we strive to understand the ocean from economic, policy, business, scientific perspectives to really inform how to build a sustainable ocean economy. Next slide, please. So what we have done is we have created a very powerful report that has recently been released. It is about building this sustainable ocean economy by 2030. So it's really about the opportunities and the challenges that we need to take into account when we want to build ocean sustainability and also create business opportunities in the ocean. And there are enormous opportunities that we highlight in the report. We interviewed 38 blue economy experts for this report. And there's a vast array of different types of speakers. So we spoke to policymakers, we spoke to businesses, we spoke to financial experts, to NGOs. So we really wanted to bring the whole perspective from business, civil society, and policy making together for this study. And it's really about the latest economic outlook for key sectors in the ocean economy. So, for example, how to create sustainable seafood, how to decarbonize shipping, how to support ecotourism, and how to build on the opportunity for renewable energy, for example. There are lots of cross-cutting themes as well that go across these various sectors. I mean, there's obviously the blue finance. So how do we finance these opportunities? How do we make them a reality? Then there is the technology opportunity. How can we harness the vast amount of ocean data that we have? And then there's, of course, the relationship between the ocean and climate change, and how that relationship can be harnessed for really improving ocean health, but also supporting the fight against climate change. And there is really several aspects in that report that touch upon coral reefs and how important coral reefs are. And those are, as I mentioned, climate change, but also tourism and blue finance. And I would like to discuss these three aspects in particular a little bit further. Next slide, please. Okay, so it's really important to understand why corals are crucial for a sustainable ocean economy, and it's really important for the aspect that we call blue carbon. And healthy coral reefs are among the most biologically diverse and economically valuable ecosystems on our planet. They provide valuable and vital ecosystem services. So, for example, coral ecosystems are a very important source of food for millions of people around the world. They also protect coastlines, for example, from storms and erosion. They provide habitats, spawning, and nursery grounds for economically important fish species. They also provide plenty of jobs and income to local economies and communities, ranging from fishing and recreation to tourism. They're also a source of new medicines. They're a hotspot of marine biodiversity. So there's lots of innovation that can be gained from exploring coral reefs and from restoring and supporting coral reefs. So as you can see, there are so many important aspects to corals and why they're crucial for sustainable ocean economy. Next slide, please. So let's drill a little bit deeper into why why coral reefs are so important. I mentioned earlier that they're important for those three aspects in terms of climate change, tourism, and blue finance. So let's start with climate change and how it is really important to support and protect and restore coral reefs to reduce the impact of climate change. So first of all, as I mentioned earlier, coral reef systems are crucial because they support coastal resilience. They protect coastlines by reducing the impact of storms and waves. And it's also the other way around. Climate change has a huge impact on coral systems as well. So if you look at the statistics that we have highlighted here that we explore in our report, it is absolutely important to stress how important the ocean is to absorb heat. We can see here from this statistic that the amount of heat absorbed by the ocean equals 3.6 billion Hiroshima bombs. And the ocean also stores around 1/3 of the world's carbon dioxide. That obviously has a huge impact on coral reef systems because carbon dioxide absorbed into the ocean from the atmosphere has already started to reduce calcification rates, for example, in reef building and reef associated organisms. So this is such an important aspect, and it's really contributing to the destruction of coral reef systems. So the relationship between climate and ocean, how coral reefs fit into that, is really important to understand. There is, of course, there's of course the aspect as well of coral reefs being part of a solution, as I mentioned, in terms of mitigation of climate change. There are other nature-based solutions that we explore in our report. For example, kelp and mangroves, they store carbon. They're really good systems for sequestering carbon and so on. And these are all a part of what we call blue carbon or nature-based solutions. And coral reefs are a vital part of that. And there are also geoengineering solutions that are, some of which are controversial. They're controversially discussed in the climate and ocean communities, some of which involve coral reefs. I mean, there's, for example, the technique cloud brightening, for example, which means spraying seawater into the air to create marine clouds and reduce the heat around vulnerable areas such as coral reefs. And there are other geoengineering techniques that we also mention in our reports, such as limestone, for example, ice generation, and so on. And these are all part of the discussion around climate and ocean, and coral reefs are an important part of that. Next slide, please. And the other aspect that we discuss in the report as well is about tourism, and how coral reefs are a vital element of ecotourism and blue tourism, this emerging sector of blue tourism. Obviously, there are crucial risks around mass tourism. I mean, coastal developments are often responsible for destroying habitats, including mangroves, but also including coral reefs. And we know that tourism is such an important aspect of the ocean economy. Some countries, such as the Seychelles, for example, and the Maldives, they depend on tourism for a quarter or even almost half of their annual economic output. So it's absolutely vital that these economies depend so much on systems and ecosystems and the services that are provided by coral reefs. There is, of course, a movement within the tourism sector to become greener and to become bluer, in a sense, to become more sustainable. We see here the statistic that we looked at in our report, that almost 3/4 of holidaymakers want to stay in eco-friendly accommodation. So there is this movement towards ecotourism, but currently there is a lot of focus on these corporate initiatives. I mean, some companies are moving in the right direction. For example, Iberostar Group, which we also interviewed for our report, they have done things such, for example, their Wave of Change program. It's all about moving away from things like single-use plastics, but also sourcing seafood more sustainably, protecting the marine environment around their properties and these kind of things. It has also launched a coral reef nursery and these kind of things. So it's really about marine conservation being included in tourism activities. But this is still in its infancy. And the question that we raised in our report, it is really about building this ecosystem sector. So just moving on to the next slide. And one final aspect I would like to include is really about financing ocean sustainability. And this is, there is a lack of adequate funding of some of the solutions that we have for the ocean. There's obviously the need to bring mainstream finance into the discussion around how to finance, ocean sustainability initiatives, such as restoring coral reefs. But currently there is a lack of adequate funding. For example, for marine protected areas, they are often seen as a little more than a paper park. And there's often revenue for these kind of MPAs will have to come from charging divers, for example, that explore coral reefs and these kind of, and other tourists and so on. And this could help to provide an income stream for some of these marine protected areas. So there is a link with with this kind of blue finance solutions, innovative solutions. And this is an aspect that I would like to hear as well from Sam later on, in terms of how to finance some of these solutions. Obviously, there's also a technology opportunity. Satellites can detect, for example, changes in marine ecosystems such as coral reefs. So this is also an important aspect. So we've really been looking into this aspect of attracting private finance into the ocean economy, and restoring coral reefs and other ecosystems is one of the crucial aspects that we are exploring in our report. Next slide, please. So just to sum up, this report really highlights some of the vital aspects of why it's so important to protect coral reefs and other ecosystems. It's important for the response to climate change. It's also crucial for boosting tourism, but also in terms of coming up with emerging solutions to blue finance and exploring new financing tools for sustainable ocean economy. So I'm very excited to hear from Sam a bit more about the great work that he's doing at Coral Vita, and addressing some of the issues that we are seeing in the ocean economy more broadly. So thanks a lot for having me, and I'm very keen to respond to some of the questions that you might have.
Sam, you're on.
All right. Well, thank you all for having me on, for everyone who's attending, and Martin for setting the scene there. I'm really commend the work The Economist and your group has done for that, and I definitely encourage people to check out that report. It's a hugely valuable resource. So, Alice, if we could just jump right into my presentation. I'll just start off by saying thank you to the Ocean Exchange. It was mentioned earlier that in 2018, we were winners of the Neptune Award. So through that community and through the prize, it really amplified the work that we're doing. So big shout out to them. I am Sam Teicher. I'm the co-founder and chief reef officer of Coral Vita, which is a company that grows corals to restore dying reefs. Next slide. So as we've heard from Martin, coral reefs are not just one of the most incredible ecosystems on the planet. I've been a diver since I was a kid. That's enough for me. But they are one of the most valuable. You've got 1 billion people around the world that depend on them for food, clothes, and shelter. 1/4 of all marine life relies on reefs, even though they take up less than 1% of the ocean floor. And they conservatively generate $30 billion a year through tourism and fisheries and coastal protection. Next slide, please. So when you think about all those things put together, they're a hugely valuable resource. And I think I live in Grand Bahama, having gone through not just Hurricane Isaias this month, but also Hurricane Dorian last year. Coral reefs also save lives. They reduce wave energy on average by 97%. So they are one of the most important, in addition to one of the most incredible ecosystems on the planet. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, they are dying. So Dane set the stage earlier in terms of how quickly they are. We've lost half the world's coral reefs already, and we're currently on track to lose over 90% in the next 30 years. So this is not a problem for the future. It's happening right now. And it's a combination of factors, sort of local and national, like overfishing and pollution, but moving forward, it really is climate change that's going to be driving a lot of this mortality. Next slide, please. What we've seen, though, in the past 20 years is that a solution has emerged. Now, the best thing, by far, speaking as a coral farmer, is not to do coral farming. It's to stop killing reefs. We need to solve climate change and end overfishing and pollution. But recognizing that that's not happening at the pace and scale needed, we need to rapidly scale up adaptation solutions. And coral restoration has been shown to bring reefs back to life. But the existing model has some key limitations. I previously set up a traditional ocean-based farm actually in the country of Mauritius after college. So seeing what's happening to the reefs right now, because that oil spill is particularly heartbreaking for me. So I got to see how reefs can come back to life, but there's limits on the species of corals you can grow, the ability to strengthen the resilience of climate change, setting up and maintaining underwater gardens near every reef that needs to be restored really isn't feasible. And then most importantly, it's tied to grants and donations. So that Project Mauritius, we got a $50,000 grant from the UN, which was amazing, but getting a grant like that is not easy. And then it let us grow 5,000 corals once when Mauritius needs 5 million corals every year. So that led us to start a sort of new approach to coral reef restoration. Next slide, please. So with my friend Gator Halpern, we launched Coral Vita as a commercial, mission-driven company that uses land-based coral farming and breakthrough methods to scale restoration globally. Next slide, please. So through a series of breakthrough innovations developed by our advisors, we can grow corals in months instead of decades, strengthen their resiliency to climate change, and then increase the genetic diversity within those species to really do more impactful restoration projects. Next slide, please. So to start off with, microfragmenting. Basically, most corals that are grown in traditional farming projects can go from a cutting the size of your thumb to hand and wrist in 6 to 9 months. But a lot of the bigger bouldering species, to go from a dime to a basketball, could take 50 years. And so we now, through microfragmenting, can grow corals of that type much, much faster, increasing critically important diversity. Next slide. Through assisted evolution, there's a field of research that's still ongoing, but we in land-based farms control the conditions that our corals are growing in. We can modify the temperature or acidity in our tanks to reflect future ocean conditions. It's like taking the corals to the gym, so that when we outplant them, they are better able to survive the warming and acidifying oceans that they're going back out into. Next slide, please. And then finally, sexual reproduction. we don't focus on as much, but actually this month had a successful coral spawning event. Corals make babies around the full moon. It's a pretty remarkable thing. And this is actually a series of microscopic images from our farm this month when we successfully cultivated endangered elkhorn coral babies. And so you can see from egg stage all the way to that one on the right is a coral larva settling. And in the wild, it usually takes 1 million eggs to produce one adult coral, and we're getting that ratio down to 100 to 1 instead of 1 million to 1. Next slide, please. So then there's the business. This is the other thing that we're doing that's different to really transform this space. Next slide. So we are looking at the ecosystem services that Martin and I alluded to earlier as a driving force. So we sell reef restoration as a service, while then also turning our farms into ecotourism attractions. So if you're a hotel that depends on sort of ecotourism driven guests, if you're a government, if you're a coastal insurance company, if you're a corporate sponsor, if you're a development bank, anyone who has skin in the game and the value of reefs can hire Coral Vita to restore the reefs they depend on. While our farms being on land, we also turn into ecotourism attractions. So as we grow the corals, we also monetize the farms. They're experiential. People can adopt a coral or grow and plant them with us. And then also we turn them into education centers for local communities who depend on these reefs the most. Next slide, please. So we launched our pilot coral farm in Freeport, Grand Bahama, and it was tremendously successful prior to Hurricane Dorian coming through. I could talk about that a little bit later. Next slide, please. But in terms of the goals that we were setting out to achieve, we were growing a diverse array of corals, 24 species compared to the traditional 3 to 5 species in most Caribbean projects. As I mentioned before, we also had a successful spawning event. So really hitting a lot of these key milestones to show we can do more impactful restoration. Next slide. And then on the business side of things, we also had the senior executives from cruise lines coming to our farm wanting to market it to their guests. We were negotiating contracts for restoration projects with local developers and have ongoing conversations now with the Bahamian government in spite of the hit from COVID, who are interested in hiring us to do these types of projects, and also really became a key focal point for the local community, for schools and fishermen and other nonprofits as a sort of marine education learning hub, which is really important for any of these types of projects. Next slide, please. So to sort of bring things to the end, just a little bit more about who we are and where we're trying to go. Next slide. I helped, in addition to setting up the UN-funded coral farm in Mauritius, formerly worked on climate change adaptation policies at the White House, as well as working for a group called the Global Island Partnership, which is a coalition of island nations advancing sustainability and conservation around the world. My co-founder, Gator, and I met at the Yale School of the Environment. He has a background in international development, business, and together with a team of amazing coral scientists and restoration practitioners, we're really trying to take this not just from the Bahamas, but beyond. So next slide, we also have amazing restoration practitioners on our team and engineering minds and business leaders who can really help us think about all the different ways that there's many pieces involved in this, as Martin sort of alluded to before. It's not just a normal business. There's policy, there's engineering, there's science. And so we're really trying to really grow not only our company, but our team and the partnerships that we're building with people around the world to make this as impactful as possible. And then to sort of wrap up, next slide, please. For where we're at now, we rebuilt following Hurricane Dorian. Our farm is up and running again. And what we had actually decided before COVID, but making our way through it, was to move forward to the next step in our journey. So to go from a pilot farm capable of growing 20 to 30,000 corals a year, analogous to just 20 to 30,000 sort of tree saplings, to expand it to grow 100,000 corals every year, which would be by far the biggest project ever. The biggest project before was 40,000 corals once with a grant that expired. So we want to do 100,000 every year with sustainable revenue streams financing it, before ultimately launching coral farms in every country and territory with reefs around the world, growing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of corals from every farm, becoming a leader not only in ecosystem restoration, but hopefully jumpstarting a restoration economy that goes hand in hand with the blue economy that can create jobs, that can protect these ecosystems that we all depend on. And I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation with Martin and this community that's joined. And next slide, if you want to follow up with me at any point, there's my contact information, and I'm very happy to be here now.
That was great, guys. And listen, for everybody, if you've got questions, and we got a lot of them right now, put your questions in the Q&A section. Try not to put them in the chat. Just real quick, Sam, what's going on right now with recovering from Hurricane Dorian and also with COVID? Where are you guys right now?
So I was alluding to all the great successes we had last summer. We launched the farm in May. Dorian arrived September 1st. We had designed our farm to be Category 5 hurricane resilient. And if you consider the winds, we had 225 mile an hour winds. I was there during Dorian. Not a single bit of the farm was damaged from the wind. However, the site our farm had been built on was thinking about not only storms, but sea level rise. We were more than double the 100-year flood event of 5 feet. We had a 17-foot storm surge at our farm. I think 80% of the island was underwater. So our farm wasn't designed to be under the ocean. So it took a pretty big hit. We lost all of our corals. All the fall was basically doing humanitarian work in the local community, but starting in March, we got things up and running again. We were growing corals. We were ready to open our doors right when COVID showed up. So we've had a few disasters in 1 year, but we got exemption from the government to keep operating the farm. So we are growing corals in the sort of traditional fragmentation way, while also, as I mentioned, this month had a coral spawning event. So we're back in action. If anything, as difficult as it was, it really reaffirmed our commitment to this issue, because we saw it's not going to get any better anytime soon. And these communities need coral reefs for protection from storms. When the pandemic hits an island nation like the Bahamas, which is so dependent on tourism, and supply lines can get cut off for food security and for ways to diversify the economy. And again, as Martin also said, this is just one ecosystem we're talking about that's so important, let alone mangroves and seagrass beds and kelp and the like. So Dorian was quite an experience, but we learned a lot from it. And we're rolling again. We're farming corals.
All right. I've got a question from AM Minhas Reza, which I think is aimed at you, Martin. If 73% of tourists want to stay at eco-friendly environments, what's impeding the progress of that industry?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it all boils down to the lack of scale. I mean, mass tourism has been around for a while, and there's obviously dominant players in that sector, and it's really about the financial attractiveness of that sector. And yes, there is it's becoming more popular, but it's often that hoteliers, for example, they view investments in infrastructure through a short-term lens rather than the long-term lens, and a lot of established ecotourism operators will need to find a way to scale up in order to disrupt the market. But in the interim, there are some opportunities in terms of government support. There could be economic development plans could promote inclusive growth, and that could also include ecotourism. So there are some opportunities, but it's really about disrupting a sector that has been dominated by some large players.
All right. Another question is, can coral farming become commercially profitable?
That's the billion-dollar question. I mean, I never grew up thinking I was going to be a coral farmer, full stop. I was more of a policy person, and also wasn't even working on the environment. It's just something I love. The whole reason we started this as a business, though, was because we recognized that policy and academia and nonprofits weren't solving this problem at the pace and scale needed. And so we did this recognizing just how valuable coral reefs are, and that if that value truly resonates with the industries and stakeholders and customers that depend on those values, we can create a whole industry around reef restoration. So I'll let you know in a few years. It's not profitable yet. Our investors definitely take more of the 10 to 15 year time horizon. We're not a 5 to 7 year sort of traditional venture capitalist investment. But we have generated a lot of revenue, all things considered, with Dorian the short time we were operational, the pandemic, from the ecotourism component. We're launching a sort of digital adopt a coral thing right now, together with maybe virtual farm tours since people can't visit in person. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of interest from not only in the Bahamas, customers interested in hiring us to restore reefs as a service, but also we're already sort of building out the pipeline for potential partners and customers, hotel chains in the Maldives, developers in the Middle East, people in Australia, East Africa, around the Caribbean. So if you take that together, I think, and again, a thing that Martin sort of alluded to before, not only is it sort of direct payment, which is the real thing we're trying to prove out, but a lot of these innovative conservation financing mechanisms are coming online that I think can be a huge driving force, not just for us in terms of us as Coral Vita restoring reefs, and not just restoring reefs, but other ecosystems. So for example, Swiss Re and Willis Towers Watson are major reinsurance companies, and they've been sort of thinking about ways they can incentivize hotel owners along the coast to pay to restore reefs. Given how valuable they are for protecting coastlines, they would see their premiums affected and different payouts that are more sort of valuable to them. You've got blue bonds coming online. The Seychelles had tens of millions of dollars in foreign debt forgiven by European nations in exchange for investments in conservation and sustainable development. So if you take all those things together, I think there's a huge opportunity for this to be profitable. And again, the whole reason we chose to take the business approach to try and be profitable was to unlock the funding that has been unattainable but is really needed to scale reef restoration to the levels that prevent us from losing the reefs we depend on.
And it's great that you're highlighting this, Sam, because I mean, in our we did a webinar as well recently. We asked our audience about the biggest challenge that startups face in the ocean, and actually access to finance clearly came on top as the biggest challenge for ocean startups. So it's great that you're mentioning some of these innovative financing tools. And it's also interesting that many of the ocean industries we looked at in our report, they start with a profit motivation. So like for instance, shipping, fisheries, they start with the goal, well, we want to make profit out of the ocean, whereas you're kind of the other way around. You're starting with trying to, make the ocean or an ecosystem more sustainable, and then you're looking for the profit, whereas normally it's the other way around. So it's really interesting how you're starting from a different starting point. So it's really even more crucial that you have the financing mechanisms in place to make it sustainable financially as well.
Yeah, and I guess I'd add on, because Dane, you're here. I think that was one of the things you mentioned to me when we won the Ocean Exchange, was that the community was most excited when I pitched, was less like, here's the solution, here's the idea or a technology, but it was more, we were proposing a whole new model, like a whole new way of doing business, which is a very difficult thing to prove. So it's an exciting and difficult challenge, but that's definitely, the way we're trying to do it, Martin, is to operate from that lens.
I think you guys just answered like the first 5 questions in the Q&A. So let me jump to this one. Is it more important to move, and this is for Sam, to move to more resilient coral species for restoration, or to attempt to keep high coral diversity? What's the happy medium?
We hope that the happy medium is both, actually. So I'll start by saying we always use native corals for now, at least. So in the Bahamas, we're only using Bahamian corals. There are international treaties that prevent you from taking corals across borders and putting them back in the wild. It's a pretty reasonable thing. You don't want invasive species. However, you have some pretty respected scientists who a decade ago would have run you out of the room with pitchforks if you suggested this, but they're now talking about taking heat-resilient coral, naturally heat-resilient corals from the Red Sea and putting them in a place that's bleaching like the Great Barrier Reef. We're not doing that right now. If it changes, so be it. But with the native corals, the advantage that the land-based model and assisted evolution uses is that we can take the corals from their natural environment, bring them to the farm. We're not, injecting them with any hormones or anything like that. We're simply just accelerating their natural ability to adapt by raising and lowering the temperatures and the like, and then putting them back out in the reef. So we will be able to see which corals, as we grow, naturally have better heat-tolerant genes, and we can emphasize them more. But that's why it's important to respect not just species diversity, but the genetic diversity within the species. We don't want a monoculture. But also that lets us not just focus on the ones that are tougher, but toughen them all up so that we can ideally replant all the species that are found there. If it came down to it, to be frank, I'd rather have some reef that has a few species than no reef, because we try to grow everything. But we do think that it is possible to really maintain a high amount of species and genetic diversity through this work.
Bobby Lamont has a question. She asks, is this method feasible for cold water corals such as in Maine? She says in Maine, a coral is only a deep sea variety, but it'd be a fantastic educational resource.
Yeah, if you can get me a dry suit. I'm not trying to jump in with my bathing suit normally, but I'd love to visit the reefs off of Maine. There's reefs in Scotland and Ireland and Norway. Um, those reefs, they tend to be deeper, so it's really a technical feasibility challenge that I think the methods to grow the corals definitely can be done. But you're talking about getting down to much deeper levels typically to plant them. That's a challenge. Also, and this is something I'm grateful for, as of now, at least, most of the impacts on those reefs tend to not be from climate change. I don't know the models, so I don't want to like offer the wrong stat, but as far as the projections for where reefs are going in terms of how they're dying, a lot of those corals tend to be impacted by things like dredging or trawling, which means that it's actually easier for those systems to recover because it's a sort of one-off event as opposed to the entire conditions around them deteriorating for years and years and years. But hopefully can plant corals in Maine. We're sticking for tropical waters for now, though.
All right. Here's a question from William Latham. Sam, have you done anything to improve the efficiency of planting the coral saplings? There was a NOAA project that specifically looked at increasing this efficiency, but I don't know what is viable proposal for it. What's up with that?
That is a big hurdle that remains. So when we started Coral Vita, two of the biggest hurdles were, can you actually grow hundreds of thousands and millions of corals from each farm? And then who will pay for it? As we're getting towards that, the next thing is, okay, how do we actually plant them? Because right now you do it by hand. It's a fun day job, but it's feasible for thousands of corals. But when you're talking about millions and millions of corals, we're going to need robotics and we're going to need mechanized tools and the like. And so actually the same year we won the Ocean Exchange, we were part of a team that pitched at X Prize, which was ultimately selected to be the new X Prize. And they're fundraising for it still, but it was largely around that idea that there needs to be advances in coral outplanting methods and technologies. And so we know people, one of our advisors is working on just that. It's something that once we finish this $2 million raise we're doing, we hope to have an R&D budget to try those things out ourselves. So that is a breakthrough that needs to happen. We're not focused on it ourselves right now just because we're not at the scale, but it is sort of a next stage of innovation and one we hope to tackle, but there are other people who are working on it as well.
All right. We've got time for one last question and then we'll wrap up and then we'll keep the line open if anybody wants to stay on. There's a couple of more questions that aren't answered, but here's one from Mike Silva. He says, I've been to many sites globally that have coral farm pods, but they're all one-off, fragmented. How does unification, branding, et cetera, happen? How do you expand globally with that?
Again, I guess the way to think about it is that we're not like entering a market and disrupting it, and we can sort of look at lots of other sort of indicators, but we're creating this as we go, which presents its challenges, but it's almost like a sandbox we can play in. So there's a number of ways we think about growing, whether it's we build and operate each farm. Right now we grow and outplant the corals, but maybe we take on a franchise model. Maybe we just do co-branding. Maybe we just grow the corals and other people outplant it. There are lots of opportunities to collaborate. So whether it is with policymakers, local communities, scientists, engineers, dive shops, groups like The Economist, I mean, this is a team effort. And we can't be the only ones who are doing this. There are amazing coral restoration organizations operating all around the world. So yeah, there could be ways that, through voluntourism, people not only could provide free labor, but even like pay to plant the corals with dive shops and the like. So again, I'll let you know when we cross that bridge. I don't know if Martin has any thoughts, since I've been doing a lot of the talking in terms of how this space can develop with organizations like ours. But it's a big global problem, and we hope to take the Coral Vita brand around the world as we do this work.
Well, let's hold that, and we can come back if anybody wants to stay on for a little bit of an after thing. I'm going to hand back to Millie.
There we go. Thank you, Sam and Martin. This was fantastic. Martin, you win the prize for the best background. It's great and so fitting, and we're grateful that you were here. And we're particularly grateful that Dane Dunstan does this. Dane works in leadership development, and here's his information if you want to call him and talk to him later. He's been with us now 7 years, and we couldn't do it without him. Next slide, Alice. What's coming up next? So we're going from coral to energy storage. Wow. It shows you the breadth of ocean exchange. Jolt Energy was 2018, same year as you, Sam, 2018 winner of the Orcel Award. And we have an executive from BASF with us as well. That is September 23rd, 11 a.m. Eastern. Next slide. Send us your feedback. Thank you all very much. Why don't we cut back to the two panelists. Dane, take a couple of more questions for those that can hang on.
Dane, you're on mute.
That unmute thing. Kathy Sackus asks, is there a specific coral species that is currently used in human bone regrowth?
That's a question I don't get that much. I don't know the name of the species. There is at least one Israeli company that actually is doing that. Yeah, so bone grafts, we're not focused on the medicinal side of corals, but that definitely I think could be a huge market. There already are compounds used for antiviral for the current moment we're living in, anti-cancer, arthritis drugs, and there is an Israeli company, I think called OK Coral. Gotta love a good pun in your company name. And they basically are infusing corals into bone grafts. So I don't know the species name, but yes, that is applicable, and it's a pretty interesting thing.
Another question from Mike Silva. He says, I'm seeing 3D printing as a way to supplement creating a framework for coral to grow on. What about nutrients?
What about nutrients in terms of?
I don't know. That's the question. Mike,
Well,
if you can expand on that.
I guess I'll just say yes. So we normally go out to, site selection is key. Not every reef can be restored. We had a hotel that, sort of to what Martin was alluding to, this is going to be a draw for our guests, no brainer, but next to their beach was a river and upstream was a textile factory. We can't bring those reefs back to life. So in addition to site selection, normally we just go out and sort of affix the corals. You take a drill, underwater glue is the normal method, and just literally plug the corals in, they grow on their own. We do that to existing limestone structures, but you can 3D print or use other methods to put new substrates out there. That's again another thing that we're planning on working on. There's some really cool companies that are doing that. And so in terms of, I guess, the nutrients, you want to put it in a place that is suitable for corals to live in. And you can engineer those substrates not only to be good for corals to grow on, but that provide fish habitat or the reduced wave energy. So lots of interesting applications there, but putting it in the right place matters.
A follow-up question from Mike. He asks, is anyone using CRISPR to upgrade indigenous species?
Yes, at least one lab out of Stanford. We're not touching that for now. I think it's really interesting and exciting, and I hope it works, but I also know that one, it's unproven, and humans also have a good track record, despite best intentions, of unintended consequences. So until we know for certain that that is a truly viable strategy, I applaud the research, and I know the people working on it, but we're not incorporating that for now.
We don't want to grow coral.
No.
So
if there's a coral zombie takeover, there are worse ones to imagine. So
it'll be slow. There's a question from Curtis Zimmerman. Where does the coral for saltwater aquariums come from? And could you more substantially disrupt the supply chain for saltwater tank enthusiasts?
I got to get some questions for Martin here. I don't know the aquarium industry as well. I mean, you have coral farms that are in people's basements. You have people that are on the coast and are able to draw directly in from the sea. There's coral farms in the middle of Wisconsin. So often they just artificially they just bring in the materials. It's really expensive to do that. And they also, their corals can't go back out into the ocean. So yeah, I can't answer that question that well, but it's just, something that people have done for a while and they have a process for it.
Well, I want to thank you guys. This has been great. This is one, I don't think we've ever had one yet that's had this many questions, this much activity. It's just a great topic and very exciting. And you both did really good in giving us a creative exercise of how to think about this. So everybody, we'll see you in a month. It's been great. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.